Hey everyone. So the last thing we did was talked about the Harlem Renaissance. We studied the art, the writing, the music of this time. And now we're going to focus a little bit more on specific writers since that has such a huge part of the Harlem Renaissance movement. So we're going to talk about Langston Hughes. We're going to do a quick write activity. So what I want you to think about is the fact that everybody is inspired by the environment around them. You are growing, you are being shaped every minute of the time that you're born until present day. And Langston Hughes was inspired by the lives of just regular, ordinary people who were living in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City where he lived. So what I want you to think about is what everyday experiences help shape your identity. So I gave you some examples. We have activities, sounds, smells, places that you go, foods that you eat. Think about what things help shape who you are. Maybe you're an avid fisherman. Maybe you spent your whole childhood fishing with a relative, and now that's like embedded deep in who you are and makes you what you are. I don't know. Come up with something specific that has to do with who you are to this day and how that environmental factor has shaped you into who you are. Okay, so the first poem we're going to look at is called Harlem by Langston Hughes. This poem refers to dreams and what happens to our dreams when they are deferred, or deferred means delayed or postponed or just kind of put off, because you know how that can be. It says, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Okay, let's break this down because he's talking about all the different things that can happen to our dreams that are put off or delayed. So he says, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? So he's saying, do our dreams shrink when we stop paying attention to them? Or do they fester like a sore and then run? So is it like unhealthy, sickly looking? Do our dreams then stink like rotten meat? So do our dreams, are they no longer appealing? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? So maybe they just get so unhealthy and so sweet like candy, but too much something is good for you. And then that makes you tired. So it just sags like a heavy load. Or the final, most gripping line of this poem, or does it explode? This is the line I want you to think about. What does that mean, or what could he be referring to that could happen to a dream that is deferred? The next poem we're going to take a peek at is called The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So there's obviously a water reference in this poem. And in literature, deep waters often symbolize wisdom. And in this poem, Hughes celebrates ancient knowledge of his ancestors that live within him. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So what he's trying to say here is that he knows rivers just like he knows his ancestry. He understands history. He understands humanity. This next poem is called I Too. And in addition to being inspired by music, Langston Hughes was inspired by writers who had come before him. He liked poets like Walt Whitman, who captured the voices of everyday Americans. And in I Too, Hughes plays a tribute to Whitman's poem, I Hear America Singing, which is a poem that we did read at the beginning of the school year. So Hughes felt that Whitman's work reflected the real meaning of what a democracy was, and he's looking at this now as a democracy without any type of discrimination, something that only Langston Hughes, being an African American, has experienced to write about. As we're reading, I want you to take into consideration and really think about how this poem, how the speaker uses the poem to kind of see himself as a part of America. How is he at present, and how does he want to be in the future? How does he want to be viewed, or how does he view himself? I too sing America. I'm the darker brother. They send me into the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. So what Langston Hughes is trying to portray here is that as an African American, someone with dark skin, he has not been invited to the table, essentially, with the rest of America. He has to overcome racism and all of these other things in order to finally earn a seat at the kitchen table with everyone else. So this is about just kind of looking at yourself and knowing that you're strong and beautiful, and waiting for the rest of society to catch up one day and regret treating you so horribly. The next poem and the last poem we're going to do today is called The Weary Blues. Now, when we did our whole intro unit to the Harlem Renaissance, blues and jazz music was a huge part of the Harlem Renaissance movement. As we read this poem, I want you to think about the connection between the blues music and the experience of African Americans at the time when this poem was written. Some background information. The blues music that became popular in the 1920s developed from the songs of enslaved African Americans. These songs, in turn, had roots in the call and response style of singing in Africa. Blues lyrics included a great deal of repetition and often described the troubles faced by the singer. So Langston Hughes was inspired by this uniquely African American music. He wrote The Weary Blues in 1922, and it was one of the poems that helped him start his life in his literary career. Droning, a drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon. I heard a Negro play down on Lenox Avenue the other night by the pale, dull pallor of an old gas light. He did a lazy sway, he did a lazy sway to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues! Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues. In a deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. Is gwine to quit my frownin' and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, thump, thump went his foot on the floor. He played a few chords, then he sang some more. I got the weary blues, and I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues, and I can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no mo', and I wish that I had died. And far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out, and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed, while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead. So the speaker is listening to an African American man who is playing this song he calls the Weary Blues. And he can't get this song out of his head even when he goes to bed at night. It just kind of like haunts him as he's hearing this music. The next thing I want you to do is make a conclusion about what life was like for African Americans during this time period. We read several poems that gave specific examples. You don't have to reference all of them if you just want to talk about one of them. I want you to talk about the poem, and I want you to tell me how you think that African Americans lived and how they were treated